Today we are going to be making this delicious meatloaf in the Breadman Ultimate Bread Machine. Hello friends, and welcome to Butterfly Meadows Homestead. I'm Dorinda. Today we are going to be using the bread machine for something other than bread. We are going to be making a meatloaf in the bread machine. I've had several requests for this, and I looked on YouTube, and there's really only maybe one other video or so out there for doing this, and I thought, you know what, that's a great idea because I love to get as much use out of the bread machine as I can. I'm going to be using my Breadman Ultimate Bread Machine, which is an older bread machine that I have. And just because I like the way it has the Teflon pan, I just thought I would use it. I have made meatloaf in it before, so I know how it turns out. And I'm going to be using a very simple recipe. And I just want to say that you can use any meatloaf recipe that you have. Your favorite meatloaf recipe, you can use it for this same process. You don't have to necessarily use my recipe. Now, normally I put freshly chopped peppers and onions and things in my meatloaf, but I don't always. And sometimes I just prefer a more smooth meatloaf without the chunks of vegetables. And today I'm just using dried herbs. I'm not using any freshly chopped vegetables, but whatever your favorite meatloaf recipe is, you can use it for this. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the paddle from your pan. You are not going to need this. So just take that out and set it aside. Now, if you have a bread machine that has dual beaters, like 2 beaters, I think the Zoho may have 2 beaters, and there may be others, I don't know, then you might be able to let the bread machine mix the meatloaf. I've tried it before, and it just does not work with just the one paddle that's made to knead dough, and it just can't mix the ground beef and all of the ingredients together to get a good meatloaf. So you are going to have to mix it in a bowl by hand and then put it into the bread pan. So remove the paddle, make sure your pan is clean. There's no need to oil it because usually your ground beef or whatever you're using has enough fat in it that you don't need to add any grease and it won't stick. And I have my ingredients. Now, I'm using saltine crackers, and this is usually what I do when I make a meatloaf. And every time I make a meatloaf, I usually make it a little different each time. But I like to use the Ritz vegetable crackers. I have used Ritz crackers. I have used breadcrumb. I have taken bread and crumbled it. And saltines is probably the most often thing that I use. And I usually will take a half a sleeve or so of saltines. And this might be, these came in a different shape package, but this is about a half a sleeve of saltines, and all I do is I leave it in the sleeve. Well, I try not to do that. What a mess. Okay, like I said, this one is shaped different, but I usually just crunch it up right in the sleeve. So let's do this over the bowl. Let's pick up the ones we dropped. Hey, I could edit this out and start over, but you know what? These are the kinds of things that happen when you're cooking, and especially if you're making a video, they're bound to happen. So I did spill my herbs, but luckily my surface is clean and I can just get those right up. So just crumble up your breadcrumbs. Try not to make a horrible mess like I did. And then I have here, with a few cracker crumbs, a teaspoon of black pepper. So I'm going to put that in. And I have a teaspoon and a half of Himalayan pink salt. I'm going to put that in. And I have a teaspoon and a half, maybe a little bit more, of onion powder. I'm going to put that in. And before I spilt it, this was a 2 teaspoons of Italian herb. So we are going to get these up. I think I'll get my bench scraper. That works wonders. And now here I have one small egg. You don't want a large egg if you can help it. Just a small egg is all you need. You don't want a whole lot of egg, but you need a little bit of egg. So I have one small egg. And then here I have a half a cup of tomato paste. You can use tomato paste, you can use ketchup, whatever you have to add the little tomatoey flavor. And mine's a little dark because I made it from dehydrated tomato powder, where I dehydrated tomatoes. Because the canned tomato paste, for some reason, really tends to give me indigestion. But if I use my home canned tomatoes, I don't have that problem. So we're going to put all that in, and you will have to use your hands. But first I'm going to mix it a little bit with this spatula, and then we'll just go in with our hands. And so you just want to make sure you get everything mixed together and incorporated. And like I said, you can use whatever recipe that you love for meatloaf. You don't necessarily have to use this one. You can use any recipe you want. I have just found that with meatloaf, simpler is better. The less, seems like the less I put in it spice-wise, the better it tastes without all that extra. Now it will be kind of dry. This beef that I'm using is not a low-fat beef. It's probably around 80 or 85%. You are going to get some grease out of it. Sometimes I use ground turkey, which is very lean, and I actually have to add fat to my meatloaf because it doesn't have any grease in it. Now, once you feel like you have everything well mixed, just form it into some kind of a little ball. Because we're going to put it into our bread pan. So just kind of shape it a little bit. Get your bread pan and just plop it down in there. What I do is just plop it down in there and then press it down into the bottom of the pan. And I usually, just to help with the drainage of the oil, I usually will kind of make a little trench all around the sides, because I do drain that oil off. So now we have our meatloaf inside of our pan. We're just going to pop it down in here. Just lock your pan in your bread machine. And whatever bread machine you are using, it should have a bake only function. So I'll bring the camera down so you can see me selected on the bread man. Okay, so there is our meatloaf down in the pan. So on the Breadman Ultimate, the bake only function is actually the last function. So I'm going to hit select until I get to the very end. And it defaults to 1 hour and 30 minutes. I want to bake this meatloaf for 1 hour and 10 minutes. So I'm going to hit the little down arrow to get me down to 1 hour and 10 minutes. And then I am going to hit start. Now it will start to bake, and at 1 hour, when it has 10 minutes left, I'm going to come back and put my glaze on the meatloaf. If you are enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and share the video with your friends. And don't forget to boop that like button and leave me a comment below. We have about 14 minutes or so left for our meatloaf to continue baking, and I wanted to go ahead and mix up the glaze that I'm going to be putting on the meatloaf. And so here I have, approximately about a half a cup of ketchup. I'm going to put that here in my bowl. And then here I have a couple of tablespoons of grape jelly. I know that sounds a little odd, but when you mix grape jelly with ketchup, it makes a wonderful barbecue-y tasting sauce. And I'm just going to mix that a little bit, and then I'm going to pop this in the microwave for about 1 minute. So to get any of the little lumps of jelly out, I'm going to take a whisk here and just stir it around. And that's mixed up pretty good. Now before I put the glaze on my meatloaf, I am going to take my pan out. I'm not going to turn the bread machine off or anything. I'm going to take my pan out and I'm going to drain off any excess grease that has come out of the meatloaf. So once you have the excess grease drained off your meatloaf, go ahead and put some or all of the glaze. I usually save back a little bit, so I'm going to put just a little more than half here on top of my meatloaf and spread that around. Then I'm going to save a little bit for when I get it out of the pan, just so I can pretty it up a little bit. But just spread that around, and then we're going to put the meatloaf back into the bread machine and let it continue to bake for about 10 more minutes. Our meatloaf has finished baking and we are ready to take it out of the bread machine. And now for what I consider the hardest part is, especially if you are all about presentation, is getting the meatloaf out of the pan without turning it upside down or tearing it up. And hopefully it's not stuck. It shouldn't be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this spatula to help me lift it out. Usually, to be honest, I just turn it upside down because the presentation part is just not that, I'm not that worried about it. But I'm trying to do a little better since, you know, this is YouTube. Okay, so here we have our meatloaf. It looks gorgeous and smells delicious. And I'm just going to add a little more glaze to the top. That's completely optional, but the glaze is probably my favorite part when I eat a meatloaf. So here we have our beautiful meatloaf that we baked in the bread machine. We didn't have to heat up the oven or the kitchen. I'm sure it saves electricity using the bread machine. I'm going to hit stop, make sure that's still not heating. I'm just going to cut this open here in the middle so you can see what the meatloaf looks like. And there you can see the meatloaf. It smells delicious. So now all I have to do is fix a couple of sides, and we're probably going to be having, with our dinner tonight, we're probably going to be having meatloaf and sweet potatoes and perhaps some green beans, and of course some fresh homemade bread. I hope you'll try making meatloaf in your bread machine. God bless. Bye-bye.